For decades, a dark-winged creature has haunted the skies over a small American town, a being said to predict disaster, death, and despair. But what if the Mothman wasn't just a myth? What if there is a terrifying truth behind the legend that no one has dared to uncover? Until now? It began in the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Strange lights, unexplained sightings, and a creature with glowing red eyes and massive wings that would soon become the center of terror, tragedy, and legend. This is the story of the Mothman. And the dark truth hidden behind the myth: it was a cold November night in 1966 in the quiet town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, a place so ordinary that nothing truly strange was ever expected to happen there. The streets were calm, the Ohio River shimmered under the moonlight, and the old TNT area, once used for munitions storage during World War II, stood silent and forgotten. But that night, something extraordinary stirred in the darkness. Two young couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving along a lonely stretch of road near the old TNT plant. It was around midnight, the kind of hour when the human mind begins to question what it really sees in the shadows. Their laughter filled the car, but that laughter was about to die in their throats. Ahead of them, on the side of the road, stood something that would forever change the town of Point Pleasant, and perhaps the world. Roger slowed the car, his headlights sweeping across the concrete walls of the abandoned plant. And then they saw it. A tall, humanoid figure, easily 7 feet or more, with massive wings folded against its back and eyes that glowed a deep, burning red. It didn't move at first. It just stood there, staring as though it was watching them, studying them. Linda later described those eyes as 2 red circles that scared us half to death. Then, in a flash, the creature unfurled its wings. The car lights caught the edges of them, vast, leathery, almost bat-like. And before anyone could react, it lifted off the ground with incredible speed, flying directly above the car. Roger hit the accelerator, heart pounding, tires screeching as they tore down the empty road. But the creature followed, keeping pace effortlessly, its wings flapping only occasionally as it glided through the night. The couple screamed, ducked, prayed. The beast stayed with them for miles, never falling behind. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the darkness. When they finally reached Point Pleasant, they drove straight to the Mason County Courthouse, trembling and pale. Sheriff George Johnson and Deputy Millard Halstead listened in disbelief as the 4 described what they had seen. But the fear in their eyes was real. These weren't pranksters or thrill-seekers. They were terrified, truly convinced that they had encountered something beyond understanding. By morning, word had spread through the town. "Winged monster chases car," screamed the local headlines. Reporters and curious residents flooded the area, eager to catch a glimpse of the so-called thing. Some called it a giant bird. Others whispered that it was something far more sinister, perhaps an omen, a warning of something terrible yet to come. Over the next few days, more reports began to surface. A contractor working near the TNT area claimed to have seen strange lights darting across the sky. Another local, Newell Partridge, reported that his television began emitting a high-pitched whine moments before his dog ran into the woods, chasing 2 glowing red eyes. The dog never returned. Fear began to take hold of the town. The abandoned munitions area, once a forgotten relic of the past, became the center of a growing hysteria. People began arming themselves, driving out in groups to hunt the creature, while others locked their doors and refused to go out after dark. The sheriff's department received dozens of calls, each one describing similar sightings: a dark figure, glowing eyes, massive wings. Experts and skeptics arrived too, zoologists, journalists, and paranormal investigators, all drawn to this strange new phenomenon. Some claimed it was nothing more than a large bird, perhaps a sandhill crane or a heron displaced from its natural habitat. But others believed it was something else entirely, something that defied science and reason. Linda Scarberry, one of the original witnesses, told interviewers that she had nightmares for weeks. She said the creature wasn't just an animal, it felt intelligent, aware, almost human in its gaze. "It didn't just look at us," she said, "it looked through us." Meanwhile, Residents began connecting the strange sightings with a series of odd events happening around the same time. Strange phone calls, faux sightings, and mysterious men dressed in black who reportedly visited witnesses, warning them to stay silent. It was as though the creature had opened a door to something much larger, something unseen. The newspapers gave it a name, the Mothman. Inspired by the comic book character Batman, the term caught on quickly, turning the terrifying creature into both a local legend and a national curiosity. Yet beneath the sensational headlines, the fear was real. This wasn't entertainment for the people of Point Pleasant. This was terror that seeped into their daily lives, into their sleep, into the very identity of their small town. The first encounter had unleashed something far greater than anyone imagined. The residents of Point Pleasant had looked into the face of something impossible, and it had looked back. And from that night on, the question would haunt them endlessly: what did they really see in the darkness near the TNT plant? Was it a creature from another world, a dark spirit from beyond, or a living omen sent to warn them of an approaching catastrophe? Whatever it was, the Mothman had arrived, and Point Pleasant would never be the same again. In the days and weeks following that terrifying first encounter, Point Pleasant transformed from a quiet riverside town into the epicenter of a growing nightmare. What began as one strange sighting quickly erupted into a wave of hysteria that would grip the community for over a year. People who had never believed in monsters suddenly found themselves glancing nervously at the sky. The air felt different, charged, expectant, as if something unseen was watching from the shadows. It started with whispers. Farmers claimed their cattle were restless, dogs barked wildly at nothing, and strange, high-pitched noises filled the air near the old TNT plant. Some residents said their televisions flickered with static or cut to strange patterns of light moments before the power went out. And then came the flood of reports, hundreds of them, each one describing a creature that defied explanation. A group of volunteer firefighters reported seeing what they described as a very large bird with red eyes. A mother, driving home late at night, told police that something swooped over her car, so large it blocked out the moonlight. Others claimed to see the creature perched on rooftops, crouched along power lines, or gliding silently over the river. The details varied, but one thing remained constant: those eyes, always glowing red, burning in the dark like two coals of fire. Soon fear became contagious. Every sound, every rustle in the woods, every flicker of light on the river stirred panic. The TNT area, once a forgotten corner of the town, became a place of dread. Yet ironically, it also drew the curious. Teenagers and thrill-seekers began sneaking into the woods at night, armed with flashlights and bravado, daring each other to catch a glimpse of the Mothman. But many returned pale and shaken, swearing they had seen something, a shadowy figure that vanished as soon as their lights hit it. Local law enforcement was overwhelmed. Sheriff George Johnson and Deputy Halstead fielded calls day and night. The more they investigated, the stranger things seemed to get. Tracks were found in the soft earth near the TNT site, large bird-like prints that didn't match any known species. Wildlife experts from across the state were brought in, but none could identify them. One expert suggested they might belong to a large heron, but residents scoffed at the idea. No heron, they said, could have eyes that glowed red or wings that spanned over 10 feet. Meanwhile, the local paper, the Point Pleasant Register, continued publishing every new report. What had begun as a local curiosity soon spread beyond West Virginia. National media outlets picked up the story, dubbing the creature Mothman, and Point Pleasant became a name everyone wanted to talk about. Television crews arrived. Journalists swarmed the town. For many, it was thrilling. For others, it was terrifying. The once quiet community was now under the microscope, its people divided between believers and skeptics. Then, something even stranger began to happen. Alongside the Mothman sightings, residents started reporting other phenomena. Strange lights in the sky, hovering orbs that moved in unnatural patterns, radio signals disrupted without reason. Some claimed to have received eerie phone calls, long silences filled with mechanical beeps or distorted voices. A few witnesses said that unfamiliar men dressed in black suits visited them afterward, warning them not to speak about what they had seen. Whether these stories were coincidences or connected events, no one could say, but they deepened the unease blanketing Point Pleasant. Among the growing fear, one man took a particular interest in the unfolding chaos, a journalist named John Keel. A writer fascinated by the unexplained, Keel arrived in Point Pleasant in 1966 to investigate. He interviewed witnesses, documented their accounts, and began piecing together a disturbing pattern. The creature always appeared near the TNT area, always near times of emotional intensity or electrical disturbances. He noted how many witnesses reported feeling dizzy or drained after seeing it, as if it emitted some strange energy. Keel began to suspect that the Mothman wasn't merely a physical being, but something else entirely, something connected to forces beyond human comprehension. But while Keel searched for answers, fear was tightening its grip. The town's churches held special prayer meetings, while local stores sold out of ammunition and searchlights. Parents forbade their children from going out at night. Point Pleasant had become a community living under siege, not from an enemy they could see, but from a presence that seemed to stalk them invisibly. One chilling night, 2 volunteer firefighters responded to what they thought was a prank. A call claiming the creature had been seen perched on a telephone pole near the outskirts of town. When they arrived, their headlights caught something massive lifting off into the sky, vanishing over the treetops with an ear-piercing screech. The men swore it wasn't a bird. They said its wingspan was wider than the road itself. Still, not everyone believed. Some insisted it was mass hysteria, fueled by imagination and fear. A few skeptics accused locals of fabricating stories for attention. But those who had seen the creature firsthand refused to be silenced. They knew what they saw. And though they couldn't explain it, they couldn't forget it either. The wave of sightings continued for months, each one adding to the town's mounting anxiety. But beneath the panic, a disturbing question lingered. Why had the Mothman come? Was it drawn to Point Pleasant for a reason? Or was it trying to warn them about something? Each new report seemed to bring the town closer to a breaking point, as if the sightings were building toward something no one could yet understand. As the fear surrounding the Mothman spread through Point Pleasant, the story began taking a darker turn. What had started as a series of eerie sightings was now evolving into something that felt larger, more orchestrated, as if invisible hands were pulling the strings. Rumors whispered through town like wildfire, suggesting that what people were seeing in the skies wasn't a creature at all, but something created, something engineered. The mid-1960s were the height of the Cold War, a time when paranoia ran deep and secrecy was a way of life. Across the country, government agencies were conducting hidden experiments, testing new technologies and exploring psychological warfare. So when locals started claiming to see strange lights and unidentifiable aircraft near Point Pleasant, many began to wonder if they were witnessing the byproducts of classified government projects. The area where the sightings first began, the TNT plant, seemed to fit too perfectly into this puzzle. It wasn't just an abandoned factory. It was once a maze of hidden tunnels, underground bunkers, and storage domes built during World War II to hold explosives and chemicals. The land itself was riddled with forgotten passageways, and some residents believed these tunnels were still being used, not by ghosts, but by government operatives. People began reporting strange activity in and around the TNT area at night. Convoys of unmarked trucks moving through the woods with their headlights off. Helicopters flying low, sometimes without visible markings. Mysterious figures in dark uniforms seen inspecting the site and then disappearing before anyone could approach. To the people of Point Pleasant, it started to seem like something was being hidden there, and that perhaps the so-called Mothman was a part of it. Stories began to circulate about experimental aircraft and surveillance drones being tested in secret. Some claimed that the glowing red eyes of the creature were actually lights or sensors from advanced reconnaissance technology. Others went even further, suggesting the U.S. government was experimenting with biological mutations, combining human and animal traits to create living weapons or psychological warfare tools meant to terrify enemies. It sounded far-fetched, but then again, the 1960s were full of strange truths that once seemed like fiction. Projects like MKUltra, where the CIA experimented with mind control, had proven that nothing was impossible when it came to the lengths intelligence agencies would go for power. So, was it really so hard to believe that the military might have been testing something in rural West Virginia, something that escaped or was never meant to be seen? One local man, who worked as a security guard near the old TNT site, claimed he saw men in radiation suits entering the area late one night. He said they were loading large metal crates onto trucks, and when he tried to approach, he was warned to turn back. He later told a local reporter that the men didn't talk like locals. Their accents were different, clipped, official. After his story was published, he stopped talking about it altogether, refusing interviews and disappearing from public view. And then there were the men in black. Witnesses who reported seeing the Mothman often claimed that soon after, they were visited by strange men dressed in identical black suits and driving sleek black cars. These men spoke in flat, emotionless tones, asked unsettling questions, and seemed to know far too much about the witnesses' lives. Some said they flashed credentials that looked official but were from no known agency. Others described their behavior as robotic, almost inhuman. They warned people not to talk about what they had seen. And when those warnings were ignored, phones began to malfunction, mail went missing, and people felt they were being watched. Journalist John Keel, who was still investigating the Mothman phenomenon, reported several such encounters himself. He received cryptic phone calls filled with electronic buzzing and distorted voices. His mail was tampered with. His notes went missing. He began to suspect that some powerful entity, perhaps a government branch or something far stranger, was monitoring him. In his later writings, Keel described the experience as if he had stepped into another dimension of reality, one where truth and illusion were indistinguishable. For many residents, it all connected: the lights in the sky, the red-eyed creature, the military presence, and the silent men in black. The fear shifted from superstition to suspicion. Maybe the Mothman wasn't an omen or a cryptid. Maybe it was an experiment, a living test subject, or the product of human error. The TNT plant, once a place of industrial purpose, had now become a symbol of secrets buried deep beneath the earth. People claimed they could hear humming sounds coming from underground, and at times, faint vibrations shook the ground without explanation. Rumors even circulated that the government had installed radar or magnetic field generators there, which could be causing hallucinations or psychological effects on nearby residents. But the more people talked, the more they were silenced. Witnesses began to retract statements. Files disappeared from local police records. Reporters stopped covering certain angles of the story. It was as if an invisible force was cleaning up the narrative, rewriting it into something safer, something that fit the acceptable version of reality. In coffee shops and barber shops, the theories grew darker. Some believed the creature had been exposed to chemicals or radiation from the TNT site, a mutated being born from humanity's own toxic legacy. Others thought it was part of secret surveillance, created to monitor or manipulate human fear. The lines between myth and classified technology blurred completely. The town of Point Pleasant, once haunted by a monster, was now haunted by questions. Who truly controlled the skies? Who was watching them from the shadows? And what if the Mothman wasn't an alien or a ghost, but something human-made, a mirror reflecting the darkest ambitions of mankind itself by late 1967? Point Pleasant had been living in fear for over a year. The Mothman sightings had slowed, but the unease in the air hadn't disappeared. People still looked to the sky at night, still jumped at shadows, still felt that something was coming. The strange phone calls, the lights over the river, the whispers of government interference, all of it had left the town on edge. It was as though the entire community was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. And then on a cold December evening, the unthinkable happened. It was December 15th, 1967, a Friday. The holiday season had just begun, and downtown Point Pleasant was alive with shoppers. Families were crossing the Silver Bridge, a massive steel structure connecting West Virginia to Ohio, eager to get home before dinner. At 5:04 p.m., as the sun dipped behind the hills, the bridge was packed with cars, commuters, trucks, families, all moving slowly in the rush hour traffic. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Witnesses describe hearing a loud metallic crack, a sound like gunfire echoing across the river. For a brief moment, the bridge shuddered, its steel beams vibrating like the string of a giant instrument. Then came another crack and another. The sound built into a deafening roar as one of the bridge's critical suspension links snapped under the weight. The structure began to twist and buckle, its silver frame bending as if made of paper. Drivers screamed, trying desperately to reverse or escape, but it was too late. Within seconds, the silver bridge gave way entirely, collapsing into the icy waters of the Ohio River below. Cars plunged into the darkness, swallowed by the freezing current. People on the bank stood in shock as the entire bridge disappeared before their eyes. It happened so quickly, so violently, that no one could process it. The scene was chaos. Screams echoed across the river. The smell of twisted metal filled the air. Rescuers rushed to the site, pulling survivors from the water, but the frigid temperatures and fast-moving current made it nearly impossible. By nightfall, the bridge was gone, and with it, 46 lives. 46 men, women, and children lost within moments. It was one of the deadliest bridge disasters in American history. And for Point Pleasant, it was the nightmare that no one could wake from. The town that had spent months fearing a monster now faced a tragedy far worse than anything imagined. But amid the grief and shock, an unsettling question began to surface, one that would haunt the survivors and witnesses for decades to come. Had the Mothman been a warning? Many of those who had seen the creature claimed it had last been spotted near the Silver Bridge just days before the collapse. Some said it had perched on the cables, watching silently as if foretelling the doom that was about to strike. A few even claimed to have seen it soaring above the wreckage immediately after the collapse, disappearing into the smoky night sky. For the terrified residents of Point Pleasant, the connection seemed undeniable. The sightings had stopped the moment the bridge fell, as though the creature's purpose had been fulfilled. Journalist John Keel, who had been documenting the Mothman encounters, received dozens of frantic phone calls that night. He later wrote that in the weeks leading up to the collapse, he had experienced a surge of strange electrical disturbances and cryptic messages warning of a coming catastrophe on the river. At the time, he couldn't decipher their meaning. But when the bridge fell, the puzzle pieces locked into place. To him, and to many locals, it seemed that the Mothman had come not to harm but to warn. Of course, skeptics saw it differently. The official investigation concluded that the tragedy was caused by a structural failure, a small defect in a single eyebar link that had gone undetected for years. Over time, stress and corrosion had weakened the metal until it finally snapped. It was, by all engineering accounts, a mechanical failure, not a supernatural one. But for those who had lived through the fear of 1966 and 1967, the timing felt impossible to ignore. The legend began to take on new meaning. The Mothman was no longer just a monster in the dark. It was now seen by many as a harbinger, a prophetic being that appeared before disaster struck. People began connecting it to other global tragedies. Years later, some claimed to have seen Mothman-like creatures before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, before earthquakes, before other moments of mass death. Whether these were coincidences or fabrications didn't matter, the belief had taken root. Back in Point Pleasant, grief settled over the town like a fog. Funerals were held every day for weeks. Families gathered at the riverbank to lay flowers and prayers where the bridge once stood. The community that had spent so long fearing an unseen force was now united in mourning something all too real. The Mothman became a symbol of fear, of fate, and of the thin line between myth and tragedy. Even the skeptics couldn't shake a strange sense of unease. Too many coincidences, too many unexplained events, too many unanswered questions. Why had the sightings stopped? Why had so many witnesses received warnings of disaster? And how could a simple structural failure coincide so perfectly with one of the most bizarre paranormal waves in American history? In the months that followed, Point Pleasant tried to heal, but the shadow of the Mothman never fully left. The Silver Bridge collapse marked the end of one story and the beginning of another. The creature had vanished, but the legend had only grown stronger. In the aftermath of the Silver Bridge collapse, Point Pleasant was left haunted by both grief and unanswered questions. The sightings of the Mothman had suddenly stopped, yet the legend refused to die. people wanted explanations. What had they truly seen in those woods? What force had hovered over their town for 30 months before tragedy struck? The search for answers gave rise to a storm of theories, scientific, supernatural, and everything in between. Some of the first explanations came from skeptics, who claimed that the so-called Mothman was nothing more than a case of mass hysteria fueled by fear and media sensationalism. They argued that the original witnesses had simply misidentified a large bird, possibly a sandhill crane, which can grow to nearly 7 feet tall and has reddish patches around its eyes. The area near the old TNT plant was swampy, a perfect habitat for such birds. To the skeptics, that was all there was to it, an ordinary creature seen under extraordinary circumstances, its features exaggerated by imagination and panic. But for those who had seen it up close, that explanation felt hollow. They insisted what they saw was far larger, faster, and far more intelligent than any bird. They spoke of eyes that glowed with purpose, of wings that moved soundlessly, of a presence that radiated dread. The scientific theories couldn't account for the strange lights in the sky, the electrical disturbances, or the eerie phone calls that followed the witnesses. And so, new explanations emerged, ones that ventured into the realms of the unknown. Some believed the Mothman was not of this earth at all. They pointed to the reports of UFOs seen hovering above the Ohio River, and the testimonies of locals who claimed to have encountered mysterious men in black, silent, unblinking figures who appeared after sightings to warn people not to speak. These stories wove a new narrative that the Mothman was connected to extraterrestrial forces. Perhaps it was an alien scout sent to observe humanity, or a biological drone, a messenger of sorts between worlds. Journalist John Keel himself hinted that the Mothman might not be a physical creature at all, but an interdimensional being capable of shifting between realities, appearing as a terrifying shape to those unlucky enough to glimpse it. Others took a more spiritual route. To them, the Mothman was not a creature of science or space, but of prophecy, a supernatural entity that appeared as a warning before catastrophe. The timing of the Silver Bridge disaster seemed to support this idea. The creature had arrived, terrorized the town, and vanished the moment tragedy struck. To believers, this was no coincidence. The Mothman, they said, was a harbinger, not of evil, but of fate, a dark angel whose presence meant that death was near. Folklorists pointed out that nearly every culture has tales of winged omens that precede disasters. From the banshees of Ireland to the Garuda spirits of Asia, winged beings have long symbolized transition, warning, and transformation. The Mothman, they argued, might be a modern incarnation of these ancient archetypes, a reflection of collective human fear in a rapidly changing world. It was the 1960s, after all, an era filled with tension, war, and technological uncertainty. Perhaps the Mothman had emerged not just from the shadows of Point Pleasant, but from the subconscious of an anxious generation. But there were darker interpretations too. Some whispered that the Mothman was a curse, a manifestation of the land itself. The region around Point Pleasant had a bloody history, once the site of a violent battle between Native American tribes and colonial settlers in the 1770s. Local legend spoke of a dying Shawnee chief, Cornstalk, who placed a curse upon the land with his final breath. For some, the Mothman was the physical embodiment of that ancient curse, the restless spirit of vengeance returning centuries later to claim its due. Amid these theories, hoaxes inevitably emerged. A few pranksters created fake footprints or claimed to have captured photographs of the creature, only for them to be proven false. But these hoaxes didn't diminish the genuine fear that people had felt. If anything, they only deepened the mystery. For every debunked story, there was another account that couldn't be explained. Another witness who refused to stay silent, another pattern that seemed to defy coincidence. Scientists who revisited the case years later offered psychological explanations. They suggested that the Mothman phenomenon was a textbook example of social contagion, where one dramatic event triggers collective anxiety, causing people to misinterpret ordinary sights as extraordinary. Once fear takes hold, they said, the mind starts to fill in the blanks. But that theory, too, fails to explain everything, especially the physical evidence, like the footprints near the TNT plant or the multiple reports from credible witnesses. including police officers and firefighters. And then there were the connections, eerie, global parallels that began to surface long after the events of Point Pleasant. In 1986, before the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in Ukraine, workers and residents reported seeing a large, black-winged figure with red eyes flying over the plant. Survivors would later call it the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Similar reports emerged before earthquakes, mine collapses, and even the 911 attacks. Were these coincidences born from the spreading legend, or was the Mothman truly appearing wherever catastrophe was about to strike? As the decades passed, the mystery only deepened. Books, documentaries, and eyewitness accounts continued to surface, each one adding another layer to the puzzle. Some people came to see the Mothman not as a monster, but as a symbol, a reminder of how little we truly understand about the world around us. Others believed the legend was a warning in itself, not from the creature, but from history, a lesson about fear, secrecy, and the fragility of human understanding. And so theories multiplied, crossing lines between science and superstition, faith and fear. Was it a bird, a beast, an alien, or a ghost? Was it a messenger of doom or merely a mirror reflecting humanity's own terror back at itself? The answers seemed to shift as much as the shadows that first gave birth to the legend, leaving only one undeniable truth. Whatever the Mothman was, it had carved its place into the fabric of mystery forever. Decades have passed since those haunting nights in Point Pleasant, yet the legend of the Mothman refuses to fade. It has survived through generations, retold in whispers, headlines, and documentaries, evolving from a local mystery into a global enigma. Even now, the question echoes, what was the Mothman? A flesh and blood creature, a supernatural warning, or something that transcends explanation? The answers seem as elusive as the creature itself. Point Pleasant today looks like any other small American town. The streets are quiet, the Ohio River flows calmly, and the TNT area has long since been reclaimed by nature. But the memory lingers. Every year, thousands of visitors flock to the town for the annual Mothman Festival, a celebration that mixes fascination, folklore, and fear. Vendors sell souvenirs, eyewitnesses retell their stories, and the statue of the Mothman, with its piercing red eyes and metallic wings, stands proudly in the town square. What was once a tale of terror has become part of the town's identity, a symbol of mystery that refuses to die. Yet beneath the smiles and festivities, the deeper questions remain. Why did so many people see the same creature at the same time? Why did the sightings stop so abruptly after the Silver Bridge collapse? And what was the connection between the creature, the strange lights, and the mysterious visitors who seemed to follow every witness? For some, these questions are clues, hints that the truth about the Mothman lies just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Researchers and paranormal investigators have returned to Point Pleasant time and time again, armed with new tools and new theories. Some bring infrared cameras and electromagnetic sensors, hoping to capture evidence of interdimensional phenomena. Others study geological data, pointing out that the region sits atop fault lines and underground caverns that could generate natural electromagnetic fields, forces that might influence perception or even attract unknown forms of energy. They suggest that what the witnesses saw wasn't a physical being at all, but a manifestation of energy, something that appeared real but existed on a frequency beyond human understanding. Meanwhile, believers in the supernatural hold firm to the idea that the Mothman was never meant to harm anyone. They see it as a guardian, a messenger from a higher realm sent to warn humanity of approaching danger. To them, its terrifying appearance was merely a reflection of how little we understand the forces that watch over us. These believers point to later tragedies, Chernobyl, Fukushima, 9/11s, and claim that the creature's shadow has appeared before each one, marking its role as a silent herald of disaster. But skeptics continue to challenge these interpretations. They remind us that memory is fragile, that fear can distort perception, and that human beings are wired to find patterns in chaos. They argue that the Mothman legend grew because it fed a need for meaning in the face of randomness, for a story to explain what science could not. The Silver Bridge collapse was a tragedy born of rusted steel, not prophecy, they say. The Mothman, to them, is a creation of collective anxiety, magnified by the power of myth and imagination. Still, even skeptics can't fully dismiss the mystery. Too many witnesses, too many patterns, too many strange coincidences. Some who tried to debunk the legend have left Point Pleasant admitting that something about the story defies logic. The town has a feeling, an atmosphere that seeps into anyone who stays long enough. The locals speak of strange dreams, of glowing lights that still flicker in the woods near the old TNT domes, of the sense that the past is never truly gone. John Keel, the journalist who first chronicled the events, once wrote that the Mothman might not be a creature at all, but a phenomenon, a reflection of human fear made visible. He believed that forces beyond our comprehension sometimes break through into our world, not to destroy, but to communicate. He suggested that perhaps the Mothman wasn't warning us about bridges or disasters, but about ourselves, our obsession with power, secrecy, and the things we refuse to understand. His words still resonate today as the legend continues to evolve with each new generation. Modern pop culture has embraced the Mothman in ways no one could have predicted. Films, books, and television series have turned it into an icon of mystery. It has transcended its origins, becoming a metaphor for uncertainty itself, the unknown that lurks just beyond the edges of what we can see. And yet, for those who live in Point Pleasant, the story remains deeply personal. The Mothman is not just a myth. It's a piece of their history, their grief, and their resilience. Some witnesses are still alive today, their memories undimmed by time. When they speak of that night in 1966, their voices tremble. They describe the same eyes, the same wings, the same overwhelming sense that something beyond human comprehension was staring back at them. These are not people chasing fame or fortune. They are ordinary men and women who saw something extraordinary, something they still cannot explain. And that is what keeps the legend alive. The Mothman endures because it speaks to something universal, the tension between fear and curiosity. The desire to believe that the world is bigger, stranger, and more mysterious than we dare to admit. Every generation has its monsters, but the Mothman is different. It doesn't simply haunt, it questions. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding and the shadows that linger on the edge of human knowledge. Maybe the Mothman was a bird or a spirit or a visitor from another world. Maybe it was a warning we failed to understand or a reflection of our own collective dread. The truth may never be known, and perhaps that's the point. The legend endures not because it has answers, but because it continues to ask the questions that lie deepest within us about fear, fate, and the mysteries that bind them together. As we reach the end of this chilling journey into Point Pleasant's dark past, one truth becomes undeniable. The Mothman is far more than a mere legend. It is a mirror reflecting our deepest fears, our fascination with the unknown, and our desperate need to find meaning in chaos. For some, it was a monster that stalked the night. For others, a messenger, a warning that tragedy was near. And for many, it remains an unsolved mystery that continues to defy science, reason, and belief. What began as a series of strange sightings in the shadows of the West Virginia hills transformed into one of America's most haunting enigmas, a story that blends terror, tragedy, and truth in ways few mysteries ever could. The Silver Bridge collapse gave the legend its tragic heart, but the sightings, the whispers, and the questions that followed gave it immortality. Even now, the Mothman hovers at the edge of our collective imagination, not quite gone, not quite here. Its glowing eyes remind us that there are still things out there, waiting to be discovered that human understanding can't yet explain. Perhaps it was never about what the Mothman was, but what it represented, the thin line between reality and the supernatural, the known and the unknowable. Every time the wind rustles through the trees of Point Pleasant, every time a strange light flickers in the distance, the legend stirs once more. And maybe, just maybe, the Mothman is still watching, not as a creature of fear, but as a symbol of mystery itself, forever reminding us that the world still holds secrets too vast, too strange, and too powerful to ever be fully understood.